All right, everybody, welcome. And thank you for joining us this weekend for the 12th edition, not weekend, week, for the 12th edition of the Virtual Throws Conference. We're excited to have you with us. Excited to share some more throws information this week. This week we have Dr. Denise Wood, who is going to share some sports science stuff with us today on how we can incorporate that and how we can incorporate some motor learning concepts to make us get our kids to throw farther. But Coach Woods is exceptionally adept at this stuff, and is a teacher at the graduate level at Huntington University. She's also a throws coach currently as well, and has done a lot of work with USA Track and Field, and has coached at Tennessee both as a throws coach and strength conditioning coach, and was quite the thrower in her own right. So thank you very much, Denise, for joining us today. We're excited to hear what you have to say, excited to get a little bit smarter today. And before we get started, just one shout out to MF Athletic and Everything Track and Field for sponsoring this and helping us get the word out, and the National Throws Coaches Association. We're really excited to have their support and appreciate all they do for the throws. So, Coach, I'm going to turn it over to you, and you have the show.
Thank you so much, Brandon, and thank you, Rob. I'm really thrilled to be here. It's I didn't even know this was happening, and you've done some wonderful things, and I know a lot of people appreciate it. So I'm going to get started. You can see that the name, and it's on the screen, right, Brandon?
You got it.
It's on the screen. Okay. How to throw farther, faster. And it kind of comes from my heart because I had to figure it out while I was a thrower, and then went on to graduate school to figure it out. So I wanted to, this is the overview. I want to give you a little bit of background about how I came to where I am in my thinking, and what that led me to is going into motor learning, because I was practicing and competing pretty much on my own. And then I got into graduate school at the University of Tennessee, and I had to learn how athletes really process information, how you develop a motor program, how you pattern movements. Memory techniques I found were very, very helpful in coaching and in strength training. The transfer of learning principle is key because everything has to transfer to competitive performance. And what is, I think, a little more unique in the way I learned it through motor learning is resistance exercises that help program throwing patterns. And then just a brief bit of takeaways. So if I had to encapsulate this, I'd say it's Olympic weightlifting, Eastern European training and periodization, and motor learning. And if you're not familiar, motor means movement, so it's how you learn movements, and it's often associated with skill acquisition. So back in New Jersey in the 60s and 70s, I got into track. My coach passed away in the first year, but he did get me to the national championships. And my coach was he was a distance coach. So he did his best, but he got me started. So I went on for a number of years, up until the late 70s, and I was getting to national championships. I was even making US teams, getting in the top 2 and 3, both indoors and outdoors. But with being self-coached, I got into a lot of errors. So while I think that held me back at the time, I think it's made me understand better how to get out of errors and become maybe a better coach and teacher. Well, one of the big influences that happened is I happened to go to Montclair State, now university, was college, with Phil Grapaldi, a world-class weightlifter, and he would go to Eastern Europe and train. He'd take off time from school, he'd go out there for 6 months, spoke fluent Russian, and he would come back and bring these training programs to a lot of the athletes, and he'd bring athletes over and I want to mention these are all Bruce Clemens photos. He trained with us too. He's in that center picture. So and when these guys do things well and they tell you you need to do this, you don't argue with them. It's like, okay, I'll do it. And on the right there was Jurek Verdanian. He came and trained with us. He later moved to the United States, and I believe his son is one of the top Olympic weightlifters. So what this meant to me was I was with, especially with the former Soviet coach that he brought over, Emil Press. I learned periodization before I knew what it was. And I went from trying to lift heavier weights, which were never very heavy for me, into becoming much more explosive with Olympic weightlifting, the lifts themselves, and some of the derivatives that I'd never heard of. But I also got to watch excellent technique. And that Olympic weightlifting and the programming that Emil gave me helped me tremendously. My sprint time went down, my vertical jump went up. And the great thing is you can learn faster than you can gain strength. And you may also be aware that early on in weight training, there's the physiologists would call it neuromuscular factors, but the main gains that anyone gets when they begin training is due to the brain and nervous system, not so much to the physiological changes. So I was really impressed with what I learned, and I was about burnt out on teaching in public schools. So I was ready to go down to the University of Tennessee, where Terry Crawford, who I knew from track competition, gave me a chance to be a graduate assistant as the throws coach. And she had recruited a fabulous bunch of athletes. She was building the program there. So I had an amazing chance. This is one of those magical times in your life where you're just so fortunate. I could bring these Olympic weightlifting techniques with me. I was able to apply them to the throwers, but I also became the head strength coach after the first year. So I got to work with Pat Summitt and Nancy Darsh and all the coaches they had there at the time, while I was competing internationally and while I was studying first motor behavior and then motor learning, sports psychology. And I've got an extra area in research design and statistical analysis because it just wasn't making sense to me what the sports scientists were saying. It just didn't fit with what we knew in the field. So I just had to be obsessive and take boatloads of more coursework. And so I was trying to figure it out. I put a few pictures in here. The one on the left was something I thought was also a unique opportunity. On one of the US teams on the tour, we traveled to former East Germany, and I was able to pick up about 20 of their books on what was really a lot of Eastern European training. And I still have them. I just took these pictures. And I can't read German, and I'm not fluent in it, but I had 4 years in high school, and I knew enough to figure it out or get somebody to tell me. So they're training books, Basics in Trainings, Biomechanics, Sports Psychology from start to finish. That's me in about 1983, I think it was. And I was able to coach in that time the the Irish national champion and Olympian. And you can see on the postcard, it actually is, that was the first national championship won by the UT Lady Vols, and it was track and field. And I was able to coach the Canadian national champion in the throws in the shot. And if you look closely, you'll see a lot of Olympians in that group. So it was really a pleasure to either be their strength coach or throws coach while I was competing and learning from so many people. It was a gift. So this is where I'm coming from. It's like looking at how you move and motor learning in coaching and in strength training. So Eastern European methods made a whole lot more sense, but I don't think too many people look at them from how you learn and teach. So years later, I went into physical therapy for 4 years as a director of fitness, and then I had an academic career. I just needed to let athletics go for a little while. And so I had worked with Lauren Seagrave way back when, and when I got back involved in track and field, again through Terry, who was only recently stepped down as a director of coaching education, she asked me to come down and speak at the IMG Academy on sprints and hurdles for level 3. So I contacted Lauren and I asked him, what would you like me to talk about? It's, related to motor behavior, motor learning. And you can see what he said. I put the quote on there. It's basically saying, we've collected biomechanical data for 30 years and we really don't know how to change technique. So they got the mechanics, but it was the same problem that we always ran into as throwers. We'd get the biomechanical analysis, which we need, and we need the physiological information, but how do you help athletes get it? How do you change the motor program, which is the plan that's in your brain and nervous system, to a more efficient one? And that's really what this is about. So, how to throw farther and progress faster than the competition. So here we're talking about motor learning and skill acquisition. And that's the thing that resonated with me. It just made so much sense to be able to take these scientific principles and lots of evidence and merge that, synthesize it with the other sports sciences. So unfortunately, that field is growing a bit in the sports sciences and in track and field. So how do you do this? And I've just chosen these ways. We could, overanalyze and look at lots of pieces of this, but the bullet points are, you have to bring the learning factor into training. It's not just training to get bigger muscles or generate more power. It's how do you get the coordinations that get the power and teach the athletes how to move properly. You have to program the brain because that's where it all starts. Before you even move, it's in your brain. And neuromuscular system, the nervous system and the muscles, to develop coordinated movement patterns and do so consistently. Motor learning is a relatively permanent change in performance, and performance implies that learning occurred. And then you select training activities that transfer well to not just to throwing in practice, but competitive performance, and eliminate those with little impact. So what I would challenge you to do, which is always a challenge for me, is look at activities to say, what's going to transfer and where am I wasting my time if you're going to speed up progress and beat the competition? So now, any motor learning or motor behavior person who is a theorist and one who's published would probably roll over in their respective graves if they saw what I've done to their work. But I've simplified it down to this is where it would make sense on the field about how you're going to teach and provide feedback. Now, I pulled this javelin thrower off Creative Commons. This is not someone I know. And the last person as well, I needed someone after the follow through and I couldn't find another picture of the first guy. So think about if you're in the ring or on the approach, before you ever move, you're aware of what's going on around you, you're sensing the environment, you're interpreting what that means, and you're thinking about, maybe you're mentally practicing what you're doing. You're probably paying attention to one particular focus or movement that you want. And then when you're ready, you make a decision to go. All that happens, and if it was out in a model, it would be multiple steps before you ever make a decision to move. And that's the key point, where this first step is really where you're giving the instruction and providing additional feedback to change things. Then you take the throw. That's when the muscles actually come in and the movement patterns. And when you're done, after the throw, which can occur in a short, less than a second in some cases, goes very fast, you can tell when it was a great throw. You just know it was easy, the shot flies or the discus flies, you know it's good. Or, oh boy, I need to do that over. So you feel it, you get internal feedback, and then you watch it fly, and then you maybe get more external feedback because you see the performance, and then you get external feedback from, say, a video or a coach. And so these are the three main phases in my little brain about how to begin to change technique and build motor programs, because that's the learning process. That's how we process information. Now, another really important principle is the transfer of learning. We hear a lot about the transfer of training, which is usually aimed at physiological changes and the underlying abilities like strength, speed, power, underlying abilities of skills. Well, the transfer of learning principle is how learning and practice on one skill affects the learning and performance of another skill. So, for example, if you're a reasonably good discus thrower and you have a lot of the basic movements there, you would probably learn the rotational shot a little more quickly than one who has not had the discus experience, because there are many common factors in there, common elements. The more similar two tasks, the greater the transfer between them. So what you want to do is look at what's similar and use that and focus on that to improve on a skill on the throw, and leave out those things that are not similar. So it's a really simple formula. Figure out what's common and what we can leave out. Focus on those things that will transfer. I put a picture in here that I'm going to go back to a little later on and reinforce. The guy on the left was a discus shot putter that I worked with, rotational style shot. And he was demonstrating a medicine ball. That's a medicine ball that's in the air in the weight room. And working on the blocking action. And so that's part of the throw. So you can use medicine ball drills, and as I said, I'll go over that a little bit more later, to teach throwing movements. And I picked this little girl on the right, who I don't know, but again, Creative Commons picture. She could really use that because she's not got her hips through first. So common quality that could transfer from the medicine ball to the delivery would be the blocking action and other similar movements. So that's the transfer of learning, and you gain a little rotational strength and torque in that as well. So what can you program into memory? Most people would say it's the movements, it's the skills, but as I just pointed out, in the information processing, you can also program mental concepts like hip rotation. It's physical, but you have to understand how it works. Slow to fast, low to high. And you also we talked about senses and perceptions and interpretation of the senses. You have to be able to do what you think you did. Your perception of what you did has to match your action. That's called perception action coupling. That's why I put the information processing in as well. So don't limit the transfer of learning from just movement patterns. Use mental concepts and perception action coupling as well. So, and I'm going to get into activity in just a moment here. So how you create the motor program in addressing Lauren's question is you have to create connections between the brain and neuromuscular system, because they're all connected. And I want to go back with just 1 second. I found this on Pixabay, the guy here who looks all electrical, the Olympic weightlifter. I think it was created visually by an Olympic weightlifter from Eastern Europe. But those are all the connections that have to be made. I thought that's a wonderful graphic. So if you're learning about the brain in school, in classes, and I teach anatomy and physiology, so we have to go through this part of the brain does this and that part of the brain does that, and we teach them kind of separately anatomy and physiology and the functions. But what we're really doing when we're performing motor skills like the throws is we're making connections between them. And you are probably aware that the brain actually changes. The electrical activity changes in the brain even when you mentally practice. And that's called plasticity. The brain has a feature of plasticity. It's moldable and changeable. You just have to mold and change it in the right way. So you do that through quality instruction and feedback. It has to make sense to the athlete. It has to be focused. Overlearning, and I'm going to hit each of these in a little while too. Overlearning meaning, back to Lauren's point, to change an existing motor program, you almost have to override it. So overlearning is learning beyond what's necessary. And when you're trying to overwrite a program, you need even more of it because physiological changes have happened in there and neurological changes that you have to override. It's harder. You want to use some variations within a range, and motor programs are generally accepted to be generalized motor programs. It's not like every little movement has its own program in the brain. It's more generalized, like what we're talking about with if you're a discus thrower and you start to throw the rotational shot, a lot will transfer because you have a generalized motor program that is adaptable to the rotational shot. And you want all practice and training to transfer to the throws. So the transfer again comes in as a key point. And you want to do the things that will transfer and forget the things that won't, or it'll get you into bad habits. Here come the tips. Now we're getting into the practical part. I've borrowed a little bit from Tommy Kono, who was, I have his book, he autographed it for me. He's passed away. He's like the best Olympic weightlifter ever as far as years in competition and a real student of the sport. He said that practice makes permanent in the athlete's brain, and it does. And so I expanded that to, it's not just the quality of practice it's not just practice that makes perfect, it's the quality of practice that makes perfect. So it's not just doing the same thing over and over, it's doing it with intention and with the right movements that you want. So here are some memory and retention tips. I used these all the time when I was coaching at UT. And I use them now. For the past about 13 years, I've been able to get back into coaching because at the high school level, because I started to teach online. So get it right from the start. There's a well-known researcher named Avery Feigenbaum, and this is the theme of one of his presentations, his publications. So learn it right the first time. And Tommy Kono said, and this is a direct quotation from his book, it's easier to teach a beginner the correct pattern, and for him it's of lifting, than to have an experienced lifter learn the correct lifting pattern. So when it's already ingrained in your head, it's harder to change. And that's what I experienced. I got into very bad habits and I had to overlearn and work a lot harder than I would have had I learned it correctly from the beginning. Now, I have a thrower here. This is his backyard. He lives on a farm. Rusty Provins, he was a 63-foot shot putter and about a 180-foot discus thrower. Dad was an SEC champion from Tennessee, and he taught him correctly. I always joked around that it was since he was in diapers, but it was actually since about 5th or 6th grade, but junior in high school at this time. It's pretty mature technique, don't you think, for a junior in high school? It's because he learned it right from the start. So to me, that means what you have to do is when you get a thrower for the first time, it doesn't mean you have to be on every single throw that they take, but you have to be there pretty frequently to guide them in the right direction. Don't let them run off on their own for too long and get into bad habits. In the very beginning when they're first learning in what you would call the cognitive stage of learning. Make instructions meaningful. I can't tell you how many times I dealt with, and I know, athletes and coaches do this as well. The coach will come back with some very good information from a school or training center and use all these big words, and the athletes look at them like, what are you talking about? So I'm picturing their head with a cloud over it. My coach is really smart, but what do I do? So don't confuse the athletes with real technical terms, and make sure it's meaningful to them. So mechanics have to guide the technique because that's what efficient movement is. But you develop your technique around the mechanics. But you have to interpret that for athletes into teaching and learning qualities that make sense to them. Use language that the athlete understands. And I can be honest with myself once and with you that when I started back at the high school, it didn't dawn on me that they're like 14, 15, 16. And I had to really adjust after working with university students and then teaching doctoral students. So it's like, okay, really simplify. And I did, and it worked. And explain why drills help and how they help and how they're related to technique. It's not just because I said so, because it says so in this book. Make it connect. And to do that, you really have to understand how they connect. And And then I think this is really helpful. I do this all the time. Probe to see if they really understand what you're talking about. If they understand what you're asking them to do, ask them to repeat it, ask them to teach it to somebody else, and check with them to see if what they think they're doing is actually what they're doing. I'm going to again use myself as an example here because it was a learning experience. Even after I was doing reasonably well and almost a 190-foot discus thrower and 57-foot shot putter, I would swear that my right foot was on the center of the ring in the discus. And someone coaching me, we didn't have the instant video feedback, would say, nope, it was right here. And it would always be just off to the left, facing out into the landing area. No, it was right on there. And, you know, you had to take a movie and then look at it after it was developed. And I said, oh my gosh, that just felt right on the center to me. But when I learned to move it over, it made a difference. But my perceptions were off what I was actually doing. And I needed to have someone be honest and tell me that. So those are things to check. Again, I'm back to the mind before movement is a guide that I like to use. Now, I know this discus thrower that I have in the picture is not using absolutely the correct technique, but he had a brain and he has a nervous system. So that's why I put that there. So use this over learning. Practice more than what is necessary just to get the skill because it kind of etches it into the brain and nervous system. As long as it's correct, that's what we want. And it's not always perfect, but if it's pretty close and you're getting good mechanics behind the technique, that's great. It's going to strengthen retention. They will remember it longer and be able to pull that program up when they need it. And especially effective, as I mentioned earlier, when errors need to be overwritten, the harder way to go about it. And you may have seen, because this has happened a few times, I've seen it on watching the Olympic Games, where they'll have a sports scientist come out and say, the mental practice actually causes firing patterns when you go through movements in your head. You add that to physical practice, and it's been well known for a long time that mental practice plus physical practice is better than just either one alone. But I found it really interesting that mentally rehearsing a throw or a lift or whatever it is actually ingrains it. It actually patterns it into the brain and nervous system. And there's electrical activity, not enough to cause movement. So it's really fascinating what the brain can do. I have a thrower here. This is Mason. He was able to, he ended up going to state and he got a football scholarship to ETSU. And I wanted to use him as the example because his errors are so typical of what one would find in a relatively new thrower. But my big point is correct the causes of errors, not the symptoms, because if you correct the causes, you are targeting the motor programs that you need. If you try to correct the symptoms, they're not going to be able to do it. So let me show you Mason here. Now, does that look familiar to you? It looks really familiar to me. Let's watch. Oh, I'm controlling slow motion properly so far. There we go. So where is he going wrong? This isn't terrible at this point. He's really doing pretty well, right? Well, now, right foot's down. Shot is still behind the foot. He's on his heel. His hips are probably back a little bit. I'm not controlling this well. There we go. Let me take it back a little. Right foot's down. Left is hanging like a flag. That could have been my leg and many other people's legs. Fine, he's settle on the heel. Oh, there's the foot. Now he can start to throw, but he's on his heel. Now, and he really can't get too much of his 400 plus pound squat legs into the throw. Well, we can identify the errors, and we could say, don't throw off your heel. Oh, I lost my thing here. Don't throw off your heel. Put your foot down faster, which is really part of the cause. Get your hips through. Don't look down. Well, those are a lot of symptoms. He's going to learn this, and he did learn this by the rhythm, learning the right rhythm and getting the foot down sooner, the front foot, because till that's down, you can't do anything. And getting on the ball of his foot a little earlier. So what are the cues to get those causes? Feel the weight on the ball of the right foot. Al Feuerbach was one who shared that one with me, and it helped me a lot. So I shared that with him. But he's got to have the rhythm and get that foot down. So coach the cause, not the symptoms. And I'm going to come back to him in a little while. He made it to state his senior year, so that was great. Okay, so to get him to do that, as one of the cues was feel the weight on your right foot, feel the rhythm, 1, 2. We worked on that a lot. But overanalysis causes paralysis is so classic because here in verbal learning, you can remember about 7 pieces of information plus or minus 2, like a phone number. You can remember that for just a little while and in short-term memory. But when you're in the ring or throwing the javelin on the approach, you've got really just a few seconds to execute. So you've got to find the feelings, the cues, those things that chunk information rather than saying you hit on your right foot and then you rotate, it goes to your knee and your hip and goes into your upper body and then the strike. Never remember that. They can't possibly execute that. So you chunk information into bigger pieces. Maybe select 1 or 2 that they pay attention to and try to practice that. See if they can improve on that, and then choose other chunks to go over other errors. So this one helped me so much because with getting a lot of biomechanical analysis, when I was an athlete, that many athletes do now, there are a lot of pieces to that puzzle. Part of the interpretation for the coach is, what should the athlete feel? What should the perception be? What's the movement concept that we can say in just a couple of words or a feeling that they can concentrate on? So one way to do that is to borrow from an existing motor program. So this is a thrower I worked with, Jessie, a few years ago. Well, she had a background in dance. And I have to say, she started out her first year as a 66 feet was her best. She ended up going to the state on the throw after this one because I was able to ask her a lot of questions about dance and be able to use that existing motor program to learn the new program, which was throwing. I'll bet you'll see the dance in this. We didn't see a lot of a block there, and that's part of the dance thing too. But if one of the things we had to deal with is that we don't want to transfer is, watch as she comes out of the back, if I can do this right, that up and down. I had to have her throwing into an imaginary tunnel or a low ceiling. But she picked up a lot of the movements that she needed to learn. And so by borrowing from sweeping movements and accelerating the legs, a lot of working on snapping in the right leg, blast out of the back. Well, it's not all perfect, but it got her to state. And I thought that was pretty good for someone in 4 years. So I borrowed from dance and gymnastics movements. I had to learn from her so that I'd make sure that they made sense to her. Here's another athlete I worked with from a neighboring school. And this is about rhythms. You remember rhythms sooner, like rhymes, sooner than you remember details of positions and lists of words. So here's, her name is Melina. She made it to state as well, but see if I can get this going. Watch what she does. She's a senior here. Can you hear that rhythm where it's very even? Listen, boom, boom. Now, if she could stay over her leg, her right foot a lot longer, that wouldn't be, oh, I went away, wait, gotta go back. Okay, so what we worked on is long, short, short. This was not the time that she got it, but she did, when she got that front foot down faster, and sometimes, you talk about the rhythm and the pieces will fall in place. And then you try to keep the rhythm going with smaller pieces that you'd focus on, like snapping the leg in, or one that has worked well with her and works well with a lot of throwers is to point the foot toward where she is right now, like 11 o'clock. She's not drifting too much over, but still she can't do anything until her left foot's down. So the rhythm, I like the long, short rhythm. It really helps in getting the right positioning and movements and an array of other problems out of the way. So I did post one of the kind of classic multi-store models of memory here, and this is part of the information processing. But how do you get things into long-term memory? How do you really make them permanent in the brain? So when you sense things and you can get to connect them with movements and you can repeat it so that it transfers into long-term storage, that's important. So, or you lose it. So in short-term memory, you've got, athlete takes the throw, you've got about 1 to 2 minutes before some of the thinking and feeling is lost. So that's why you want to give pretty immediate feedback. You can give them a second to kind of process it and think about what they did. But what you want to do right away is pay attention to the key features that you want them to remember, so it's still in their short-term memory. Then keep focusing on the repetition of what worked. I will often say to athletes, what did you feel? Oh, I felt this, do it again, because it's in their head. What works for my head might not work for theirs. And then you always want to try to match those perceptions with the actions. So the key point here is short-term memory doesn't last long. You've got to be able to get the key points into long-term memory. Now, I like this part because this is the piece that takes the strength training and keeps the biomechanics and keeps the physiology, we need those, but integrates the motor learning into strength training. So strength training becomes a training skill. So it's all of it. So, and let me say, before I get into this very much, I'm going to show you some pictures and videos of high school kids now, mostly. And when I started to coach in Knox County in South Doyle, as I said before, when I started to teach online, it was around 2007, 2008. And I started, and this is important because what I'm doing is cheering for these kinds of exercises and trying to encourage you to incorporate them. What I did was take the same concepts and the periodization and all the explosive exercises I used before, which I'll show you some of, and use that at the high school level and adapted it a bit, of course. But what happened was I worked with one thrower whose friend was a rugby player. And the rugby player saw the thrower do so much better in throwing and in football that he said, I want that program. I gave him a program for rugby. I had to learn a little about rugby. And the rugby coach came to me and said, will you work with us? And he said, Jacob is taking down guys he couldn't take down a month ago, and he showed me the videos. And he's sticking his arm out and taking him down. He's so much faster, nobody can catch him. What did you do? It was the strength training. Now, let's also qualify. Really great coaches, whether it was at the university, the event coaches and the rugby coaches. So I got hired to be the football coach and had to take the certified strength and conditioning specialist bear of a test. But I became the head strength coach in the public schools, and I'm working then with football. First year in football, not just because of me, I'm not, but the skill guys could catch anybody and they could get away from most anybody. Undefeated season for the first time. And the linemen were also, they could move really quickly and get in place. So you don't want to get into the thinking that the more you squat, the farther you throw. It's the more explosive you are and how quickly you can react, the farther you throw. So let me move on here. I love that I found a brain with a barbell overhead. So here's the key, and this is where the research, make the connections. It supports it. Lifts and resistance exercises are skills in and of themselves. So we're going to capitalize on the transfer of learning as well as the transfer of training. So again, similar movement patterns, similar mental concepts, and the fitness abilities, the physiological part, can transfer to the throws. And I could have put this on any slide, but I put it here because you want to tell them what to do in the weight room and with the resistance exercises as well as on the field, not what not to do. So, and I'll jump on that again in a second, but target the specific motor patterns with multiple drills and exercises so it's a theme that helps you overcome an error, helps the athlete overcome an error. So here's this guy, Dennis. He's the thrower football player who started to improve so fast. And he has, I just have two photos of him, but he pulled the weight from the floor. It's a very light weight. He's doing a snatch. And the key thing is here that he's using his full body, the full extension that I think weightlifting coaches would call the third pull. I think of it all as the same pull. And he's going to extend, third pull being where he is up at the top off the ground, which is okay for a thrower because summation of forces, you get the force going. It doesn't matter if you're on the ground or not. Thrower is probably going to be off the ground because of summation of forces. But what he learned here was slow to fast, lower body before upper body, full extension. And I included Phil Sabatini in here because look how on his toes he is. Beautiful full extension. It does my heart good. It's beautiful. So, but these are movement concepts that apply to throwing events. Now, we're not looking at the rotation, we're not looking at other pieces here. We're just looking at slow to fast, lower body before upper body. And if you've done any coaching or thrown anything, the first thing you want to do is use your arms. Get it in the hand, use your arms. This teaches the body action first. So we're borrowing that concept. The split jerk. I can't say that I know that many, at least high school coaches, do a lot with the split jerk. But why I like to use it for throwers and other athletes, and there's the electrical guy again, getting through his whole system, is that if, like Mason and others, if they're not getting the touchdown rhythm of the 1-2, long, short, short, if you're going to do a split jerk, your feet have to come down almost at the same time. For practical purposes, I tell them to put them down at the same time. And if they're way off, I'll say, well, put the back foot down first and I overcompensate, and then they often get it. But that rhythm is extremely helpful. Now, the trunk is upright where it's not in a throw. The weight is not totally over the back foot, the power foot, but it's teaching that rhythm. It's also teaching alignment. And I've talked to a number of other coaches who've been around a while, and what they report, and that I agree with, is a lot of the kids don't have the same level of body awareness that they did maybe 20, 30 years ago, because everything's gone to fitness and sport specialization. I can't say everything, I'm exaggerating, but we find that a lot of the kids can't tell where their back foot is, and they may open up too soon. They don't have the body awareness. This helps teach the body awareness, and it helps get the legs straight back a little bit more. So and you can find many other things that you can do with it. Here's Mason again. We had cause and effect before. He did a lot of split jerks, and you can see how, imagine the rhythm of boom, quickly with the shot put would relate to, you can't do a split jerk and have that kind of timing. So that helped him. And what I'm really encouraging you to do is choose a variety of drills and exercises on the field and in the weight room, so you have a theme to target whatever you want in any given thrower. Now, the Russian coach, Emil Press, he gave me this exercise, and I said, this is lightweight, this is just not going to work. It's a speed jerk, and as far as I know, back in the 70s, I don't think anybody was using this. So I think I was very fortunate to have Emil bring that to me. And I was pretty well involved at the national level. So, and maybe others got it at the same time from other coaches, but this helped me tremendously. So remember the foot in the middle, it's not moving. It's reactive strength, speed strength is that we need. Watch, this guy was not the best on the team, but he could crank this speed jerk out. And if you look at that, I want to go back to him again. In the middle, it's hit and go, hit and go, hit and go. Watch. I did it again. Wait, I got to go back to this. Woo, he's going faster than I thought. Feet hit down at the middle, split, react, react. And with me, they're usually yelling at them, faster, faster, faster. It's never fast enough in my head. So I'm always yelling at them to go faster. This is the very kind of thing that helped me tremendously. It's like sprinting. And you notice here, I've always got his power leg in front. So he improved. They all improved by this. You get the quick feet. I remember Karen Smith, one of our top javelin throwers for a couple of decades, she called it happy feet, that you have to move your feet really quickly. Watch and see if your kids are hitting in shot, discus, javelin, anything, and see if they're very slow to react. And you can see I still have them doing other lifts. It's not like there's Katie in the back doing a parallel squat, the only kind of squat to do. So now this guy was the quarterback on the undefeated team that year. And he liked the speed jerk so much, he took the Gardner-Webb with him on scholarship. And I would be yelling at him, faster, faster, faster. He's in college at this point. But now you see what he's doing. If I don't just keep doing that, I'm just too much with this. I'm not perfect at this, you can tell. But what Brody is doing, watch his foot pattern. Instead of keeping his right foot forward, and he's right-handed, what I have the sprinters do, and I did this with at UT and here, maybe 2 sets with the right foot forward, 2 sets with the left foot forward, 2 sets alternating left and right, and 2 sets on angles, and that's what he's doing. You can see, if you're a runner, especially a quarterback, you've got to take off in different directions. So for anyone who's, I'm just going to kill myself with this. Wait a minute. Okay, watch the angles that he's working on. Watch his feet. See how they're on angle. To drive my point home a little bit more, you may know of a book called Triphasic Training, and it's built off quite a bit off the periodization former Soviet system. And the author in the beginning of the book explains about the difference between a faster runner, and I'd apply that to throwing, and a slower one is how quickly they touch down and go. It's basically touchdown time. And the one who can move their feet faster is the one who is going to go faster. Now, of course, stride length goes into that, but he was focusing on the triphasic, the concentric, eccentric, and a very slight, very, very fractional isometric in between. So now I'm going to go on to the, oh my gosh, time is flying. Medicine ball training. Didn't realize what time it was. Okay, with the medicine ball, I alluded to this before, and I took Dennis and the same girl that I lifted from Creative Commons. You can reinforce these movement patterns and get it into their heads better by feeling the weight on the power leg, by feeling the hip action. You're throwing this into the wall, transferring the weight, feel the transfer weight from front to back. You can practice the blocking action, which is what Dennis was doing in that particular movement, and you're integrating them. And one thing I found very helpful with this was that, that they have to have their left foot down to raise the angle of release, the lift on the throw. So what I have them do is go through the movement and practice making the ball rise, the medicine ball rise, by using their body action, not from taking the ball and holding it low and throwing it up with their arms, but using their body action and giving them targets on the wall and then asking them what they felt. And it works amazingly well. Don't use too heavy a medicine ball because it will drop their arms, and you don't want to get into, what's termed compensatory movements in throws. So, keep it relatively light. It serves the same purpose as throwing shoes and towels on the field. So you're taking away that mental set that you'd have if you're in the ring and you have all the other pieces that fit. It lets you isolate this, but integrate it. This is the last one. So The takeaways. You want to build motor programs, not just movements. So when I hear, yeah, we have to learn not just muscles, but we want motor programs as well. We want to target movement qualities, as I mentioned, the qualities of slow to fast, the mental concepts that go with it, their understanding of it, their perceptions, not just the muscles. Combine these techniques. It's a treasure trove of tools. I've only mentioned a few of them that you can pull out and have them accelerate their progress and performance and do it faster than what I find is with athletes that aren't as big, aren't necessarily as fast, but you can take them from okay to good and from good to great if you use some of these. Target the qualities between the training activities and the throws, capitalize on the transfer of learning and training. So I hope I've given you a few tips that you can use actually on the field and in the weight room. It's just the tip of the iceberg, and thank you so much because it's a great chance. I'm going to give back mode because if you don't share it, it's useless. So thank you so much for giving me the chance to share that.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, Denise. This is awesome. We have, I think, a few minutes for a couple of questions? Would that be okay?
Okay with me.
Awesome. So I'm gonna go right. We've got a couple submitted on YouTube. First of all, that was great. I've got a couple pages full of notes here, and I've got a couple questions for you, but we'll pull from YouTube first. David Espinoza is asking, how long does it generally take to overlearn a movement? How long are you needing to work on that before you feel like you can override some of those bad habits?
Well, the more ingrained it is, the longer it takes. And I know I can, and I'm going to speak for myself because I had some really bad, I was Mason for a long time. And when I was able to get the tools, the lifting exercises, that helped me because that alone was motor patterns to change. But I had to, even when my technique was better and more consistently better, I can't say I really, really overlearned it. I overlearned it consistently enough to get one throw in 3 in the ring in preliminaries. But if you catch them earlier and it's not so ingrained and you can borrow from other skills, it doesn't take as long. And let's face it, let's mention that Denise threw for about 20 years and 10 years of that ingrained. So it'll probably be faster for others.
Awesome. And speaking of catching mistakes early and learning it correctly from the get-go, how do you recommend teaching from someone from the start? Is the whole part whole philosophy still valid, or is it going to be more drills, more learning the whole movement, or what are some tips for kind of getting it right at the start?
Yeah, well, in the very first place, I don't think anyone would disagree with this. The athlete needs to know what the throw looks like. So the whole part whole. Some might say you might do a progressive part in that as you get into the power position, but they need to know what it looks like. And you point out the key features early on, because as soon as you give them an implement, the arm is going to be the thing that they're going to use, forget the body. So, and when in advance, if you've practiced for a while, if you've coached for a while, you know what's going to go wrong. So I would anticipate those errors. So get the whole picture, whether you're demonstrating or a good athlete or the video, and point out what you want them to know. And so one of the things that I like to focus on early on is, you pretty much have to go through how you hold it. You've got to go through the grip. A little harder in the discus, they're just going to grip that and try to wing it. So anticipate what's going to go wrong. But, once you get past the release, I start very early on focusing on the body action and beginning to use the kinds of drills we're talking about to get the power position going. So, and there are a lot of good progressions out there, and I don't think mine is so unique, but standing, shifting the weight to the back foot, doing hips, arm, focusing on the block. Before you ever really let them get into a glide movement, I think is helpful. and focusing on different parts of that throw. Then, and I know it's very standard to have, this is one thing I personally avoid, and I'm maybe a little biased, but getting into, let's say, the glide and the shot put, and we're using a glide technique now, of course. One of the first things that is often taught is the unseat, which works pretty well for large male throwers for the most part. But I know my seat got way ahead of me, and I never caught it when I tried to unseat, and a lot of the male throwers taught me that. So I start out with feel the weight on the ball of the right foot if you're right-handed, and feel it again at the middle. And start letting them glide, not even in the ring, but just short, just short, so they get the feel and get the feet to land at the same time using the rhythm, and then adjust from there. And so, and I did for a while have an Australian coach who was an Olympian, Jean Roberts, and she helped me with glide and stop, glide and stop, pop up in the air without the throw, and then take the throw. So you want to integrate those patterns as much as you can. So in short, anticipate what's going to go wrong and coach to avoid it.
Cool. Great. And we've got one more from YouTube. I think we have time for one more. Have you considered mentoring the next generation of women's throws coaches? And what advice do you have for us women who are wanting to coach on the next level?
Wow. Well, I would love to mentor. I like to give back. I've been lucky to get into, USA track and field. I'm not doing that right now, but I did that in the sports sciences, not in the throws. But I've been giving back at the high school. I just have been so engrossed with everything in my life that I haven't. But what I really want to be able to do is get to publish some more. I talk about it a lot, but I've always been overloaded to do that. But I want to do those things, and I would love to be able to give back more. And I'd love to be able to share those tools with men and women coaches, and collaborate on things, help interpret what the sport scientists are saying to put it on the field, because there is that gap. And that's the very reason I ended up taking so many research courses, so I understand what they're talking about. So the answer is yes, I would love to do more of that. And I feel like even though it was hard when I was throwing, it was a gift to be able to learn the things that I've learned.
And if there, any of us watching this that, want to learn more about motor learning and how we take some of these scientific principles and apply them, to teaching our throws, do you have any recommendations for where we could start, and any readings or resources that you feel are particularly good starting points?
Yeah. I went over and over this presentation to make sure every period and everything was in place. And I had a slide with some book recommendations that I left off. So of course I would have had to put it in perfect APA, there's one textbook that I think is written at a level that if you haven't had any background, it's really helpful. And it's written by a former javelin thrower, Cheryl Coker. And I've got it over there, can't quite see it. I think it's called Motor Learning and Control. And but Cheryl Coker is, if you Google or Amazon search Coker, she refers to a lot of the things that I've talked about. I had, there are a number of good ones. My favorite one right now for getting a little more scientific about it is from Jeff Ives. It's Motor Behavior and Control Mind-Body Connections. And I've been working on a book, and I've pulled quite a bit from that. It's got a lot about motor learning and power and the types of strength and abilities, and he goes a lot through intramuscular and intermuscular coordination. So it's a little deeper, but very applied.
Great.
So those would be my two recommendations. Sorry.
Hey, Denise, it's Rob Lasosa. I just want to tell you, yourself, Earlene Brown, Marin Seidler, Kate Smith, all of you were trailblazers, not only for women's throwing, but also for women's sport in general. and you're a legend. You're a legend in the sport, and I just want to really sincerely thank you for being so inspirational.
Thank you so much, Rob. I'm going to send your check right away.
Yeah.
But no, thank you. You're more than kind, and I am.
How's your jump shot these days?
Oh gosh, I got to tell you, with the COVID going around, I couldn't go to the gyms. I actually set up an Olympic weightlifting platform and station right in my house. Still love it. And
I'm sure many people don't realize that you were quite the basketball player in your day.
Yeah,
also,
I try not to think of that too. In college, I was in
Yes.
college. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, don't do too much of that now.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Hopefully, we'll put some of those books and things like that in the show notes when we get it posted. But we really, I have tons of notes here, and thank you so much. And I know personally this is kind of my background too, and could geek out with this stuff all day. So I appreciate hearing some other people who really enjoy the science behind what we do, and that was really, really great. I will just say a quick thank you to MF and Rob and the National Throws Coach Association. MF is continuing to help us get the word out and sponsor the event, and is giving away gift cards to one random listener each week for, if you share it on Twitter and help us get the word out. And Katie Peterson is won a $25 gift card to MF Athletic today. And Alex Heacock has got an MF shirt coming his way too. So reach out to Rob and we'll get you hooked up with that. But thank you very much to Rob and MF and National Throws Coach Association and Coach Woods as well here. And we will wrap it up there. And Coach Wood, if you want to hang out, I'll end the stream, but you're more than welcome to hang out here for a few minutes.
I'll hang out here with you. Thank you so very much. It was fabulous to be with you.
Thanks, Denise. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Rob.